cortex is designed, particularly the cortical spinal tract, is to govern and take these vicissitudes and these volatilities and these instabilities and these inequities and integrate them so we have governance. For thousands of years, humans have had a desire to master their life. And what that means is to go beyond just survival, to master their own governance within their own body for health purposes, and also master their environment around them. And throughout the centuries and millennia, there have been individuals, sometimes called wise men and women, who probe deeper into those mysteries and solutions than others. And they, with English language and other languages, put together what they had learned on that mastery. And I'd like to discuss that perennial wisdom that has been flowing for the last few thousand years since written, recorded history. And so this is why you want to take a note, maybe, because there's been parallel paths in various cultures over different times, really saying very similar messages. I'll use somebody local and I'll go back in time, forward and backward. There was a gentleman named Abraham Maslow who wrote a book called Personality and Motivation. And he described a state called self-actualization. And he said that there were people that were in survival and security and socialization, and then self-esteem and self-actualization. And he said that there was a scale of degrees of mastery, from surviving and basically not having, oxygen and water and food and this types of thing, reproduction and clothing and security of a secure place to live in, to eventually self-actualizing, to have none of those concerns and to be able to do something extraordinary with your forebrain capacities. So he called the term self-actualization what I'm calling self-mastery. That was his term. He said there was the reality of the senses that were hallucinative and elusive, and then there was the actual objective truth out there. And self-actualization was coming to the realization where you actually see things as they are, not as you assume they are. And the magnificence of the way they are is far greater than the fantasies we impose as a result of our incomplete awarenesses of our environment. Carl Jung called this same path, in a sense, a state of synchronicity, where you are integrating the pairs of opposites, the unconscious and the conscious, sometimes called. Leibniz used the same term in his times. He's the one that kind of coined the idea of the unconscious and conscious. But Jung put that together in his Mysterium Conjunctivum text. And he said the path of synchronicity, where you've extracted out space and time from the mind and become present. That's another term for that same path. And each of these individuals had ways of doing it, but they all had something in common, the integration of opposites. In the 5th century BC, there was a guy named Empedocles. I don't know if that's the proper spelling, the proper statement, but I call him Empedocles. And he said there was love and strife, and people that were masterful were able to perceive and act out of love. And the people that were less masterful lived in strife and caused strife. They were polarized in their view and exaggerating and minimizing themselves. I always say that at the level of the true authentic self, nothing's missing in you. I was with a Bonpo Lama in Nepal, and he said, nothing missing, nothing missing. At the level of the soul, the state of unconditional love, the state of authenticity, we have that awareness. The Gnostics called it pleroma, fullness. But the Bonpo Lama was describing it as nothing missing, it's full. But the majority of people are feeling empty. And every time you judge another individual and perceive them beneath you and you're too proud to admit what you see in them is inside you, you have emptiness. And if you put them above you and you're too humble to admit what you see in them inside you, you have emptiness. Disowned parts, we call it. You haven't integrated all your parts. So what one person calls integration, another person calls self-actualization, another person calls synchronicity. Because when you actually put those pairs of conscious and unconscious parts together, because when you're infatuated with somebody, you're conscious the upsides, unconscious the downsides. When you're resentful to somebody, you're conscious the downsides, unconscious the upside. When you put the conscious and unconscious together, you're aware of both sides. You have fullness, pleroma, and synchronicity of opposites. And you have now self-actualized states because you're now not missing anything and you're full. Some have actually called it equanimity. Ralph Waldo Emerson called it transcendence. Kohlberg called it transcendent. The highest level of moral reality, if you will, moral actuality, is the transcendent state where you've transcended the moral hypocrisies of the judgments below, of incomplete awareness as a subjective bias. In the Gita, they called it as it is, Om Tat Sat, as it is. And Krishna was the individual who represented that in the incarnation and taught Arjuna, which represented the part that was unaware, not masterful yet, listening to the master. In Buddhism, they call it mindfulness because nothing's missing. The Buddha says the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is a source of human suffering. But the things we infatuate with, that we're conscious the upsides to and unconscious the downsides to, is unobtainable. We can't get a one-sided state in life. It's like taking a magnet and dividing it in half and expecting to get a one-sided magnet. In magnetism or in chemistry, it's the pursuit of neutrality. And all of chemistry is trying to look for the octet rule to be able to have a neutral, rare, noble gas state. It's called a rare nobility in chemistry. And I think of love as the balance of those two. So the pursuit of love is actually that. So in every field, in another field, it's called equanimity and equity. In the Christian writings, they said Christ represented a state of equanimity and sin was the inequities. Again, the polarities, the subjective biases instead of being objectively true. In neuroscience, we call it the integration and the synchronization and simultaneity of the firing of the brain. In fact, if we have a perfect synchronicity, you get a gamma burst of realization. And photons are born in the brain. You get literally enlightenment in the brain, biophotons. And in the state of this integration, this executive center is self-governed. So you have the path of mastery when you're self-governed. If you look at the works of prioritization, you'll see that under studies of priority, you'll find out that when people live by their highest value, as Aristotle called the telos, they awaken the blood glucose and oxygen into the forebrain and awaken the executive center. And the executive center is the one that governs all that below and is involved in inspired vision and strategic planning to anticipate what's with the future and imagination, what could go wrong and prepare for it. So you're not reactive, you're proactive, the path of mastery, executing the plans and self-governance. So whether you're in business and you call it prioritization and delegation of lower priority things to be able to become a great executive, it's the same story. In neuroscience, we know that there's what they call lateralization of the brain when you're emotional, but when you're centered, you have an integration of the brain. So we could call it again integration. So no matter what field we go into, neuroscience, we go into neurology, go into endocrinology. Endocrinology, we have a balance of hormones. In neurotransmitter studies, we have a balance of neurotransmitters. And then wisdom of the body by Walter Cannon and Claude Bernard and his Intermelios said that there's an innate wisdom in the body that brings homeostasis to bring things back into perfect order. I'm a firm believer that everything that's going on in your life, no matter what it is, physiologically, psychologically, sociologically, or theological, is nothing but a feedback mechanism to get you to authenticity. The term that's authenticity today is really this state of mastery, the path of mastery. Because the magnificence of who you truly are is far greater than all the fantasies you'll impose on yourself. When you're not living by highest priority, you feel unfulfilled. When you're unfulfilled, you then look for immediate gratification to fulfill yourself. and you activate your blood glucose and oxygen into the amygdala. The amygdala then tries to avoid predator and seek prey, avoid pain, seek pleasure, and look for immediate gratification, and pursues hedonistic, immediate gratification, addictive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors, which is not mastery. But when you live by highest priority and you feel fulfilled doing what you really love to do, you're moving in the path of self-actualization. That's why in every class I talk about values. Because if you live by your highest value, you're on the path of mastery. Whenever you're not in the path of mastery, you tend to polarize yourself and tend to synthesize yourself. And when you polarize yourself, when you infatuate, whatever you infatuate with literally consumes your mind. It's called brain noise. It's literally called static in the brain. It's called evoked potentials. There's hundreds of writers that are referring to these in different terms. And the second you do, when you're highly infatuated, you can barely sleep at night because you're preoccupied by that which you're infatuated with. And if you're highly resentful, the same thing. So anytime you're polarized with infatuation, resentments, and seeking and avoiding and impulsive and instinctual, and you're basically distracted, you're not present, you're not centered, you're not self-actualizing, you're in you might say the animal mind, reacting. In the study of neurology, there used to be a systems 1 and a system 2 type of thinking. System 1 is like this, an animal brain, where you're emotionally reacting before you're thinking. System 2 is thinking before you react and having governance. The system 2 is a byproduct of living by priority. It's a byproduct of putting your conscious and unconscious together. Your intuition is actually trying to reveal to you your unconscious to make it equal to the conscious so you can be fully conscious. And when you do, you have now reason. So the philosophers called it reason. Some of the mystics called it the logos. It was called pleroma by the Gnostics. It was called enlightenment by the Buddhists and by some of the Eastern mystics. It was called presence. Just like in quantum physics, if you have a particle of light, which is timeless, spaceless, massless, and chargeless, and divided into its particle and antiparticles, a positron, electron, they're spinning forward in time, backward in time, an imaginary particle, a memory particle, and they're both polarized. And when you're spinning forward in time and you're positive or negative, you're only seeing half the equation instead of neutral. When you have a neutral mind, which is objectivity, you have enlightenment. So you take the positron, electron mentality, positive, negative emotions, and integrate them, you have enlightenment. So no matter what field we go into, in mathematics, it's the integration versus the differentiation, breaking things down and integrating things up in space and time. When you extract out the space and time from the mind, you become present. In ontology, it's becoming, we call it the essence of being. And when we're not in the in integrated state and we're in a disintegrated state, we're in the existence of becoming, where we wear personas and masks instead of actually awakening our inner being. We call it a sleep when we're not alive to both sides. We're unconscious of things, and we call it awakened. We're in the flow because we're effective and efficient in our nerve conduction pathways. We call it myelinization. The glial brain in the brain, the glial cells myelinate the forebrain when we're in a self-actualized state, and when we're not, we're under a highly emotional state, a distressed state. We're myelinating that amygdala again. Distress is the perception of fear of that which we seek, and a fear of loss, fear of gain of what we receive, the loss of what we seek, and a fear of gain of what we're trying to avoid. So we're in distress mode and not in master mode whenever we're in that polarization. It's called, in a sense, unity consciousness by some writers. And in a sense, it's a science. So whether you study it by philosophy and called it integration, or you use the dialectic in philosophy by Zeno and you integrate, or Hegel, when you take the thesis and the antithesis and you synthesize that and create the synthesis, which is a spiritual awareness, according to Hegel, a God consciousness, if you will, if you want to think by the theologians. Or if you go by perfectly by St. Augustine, he called the will of God was equilibrium. And when the will of man matches the will of God, he's equilibrated. He's present with the divine nature. The divine nature was an enlightened state where you're fully aware about an omnipresent awareness, if you will, or at least a relative one to what you experience. So no matter what pathway we've taken through the ages, no matter what the path, there is a common thread to it. And this led me in this pursuit, studying thousands of different writers and over the last nearly 50 years now. What is the common thread to them? when Empedocles talked about, he talked about the four elements. He said, when the four elements are integrated, you have the quintessent fifth element, which is love. When they're disintegrated, you have the four elements which break things down, and everything that's in the existential world is broken down into those parts. Now, the question is what's the science of integrating all these parts? How do we actually self-actualize the path of that? That's what I've been interested in. And one thing is common, it's about the brain. In fact, if you look at the history of this entire journey, from the very esoteric and animistic earliest religious writers to the mystics, to the shamans, to eventually the mystic religious, the mythologists, and then the religious people, and then the philosophical people, and the metaphysical and philosophical people, then finally into the scientific age. No matter what we do, you can see it's an evolution of the brain. So anything we can do in neuroscience today that can evolve the brain and help us integrate the brain, which is what the brain is designed to do. It's designed to, in the thalamus, which is kind of the filtering gating mechanism for all the sensory experience before it goes into the cortex, it basically is there to integrate it. And the cortex is designed, particularly the cortical spinal tract, is to govern and take these vicissitudes and these volatilities and these instabilities and these inequities and integrate them so we have governance in our life. Our brain is doing everything it can to help us have governance and to be authentic and be inspired. An inspired path. I always say the transcendental state is gratitude, love, inspiration, enthusiasm, certainty, and presence. These are the culmination of an authentic pathway. And every week when I teach the Breakthrough Experience program, which is my seminar designed to help people do that exact thing, to help them on the path of mastery, I developed a science that integrates all these philosophers and thinkers and mystics throughout the ages, and the scientists and neuroscientists, to try to make a simple, duplicatable, reproducible, transcribable, translatable system and hold you methodically accountable to perceptions that are keeping you from being on your path of mastery. Let me give you an example. You meet somebody, and maybe you're enamored with them, and maybe you're infatuated with them, and you're conscious of the upsides and you're unconscious of the downsides. Well, when you do that, you tend to act too humble to admit what you see in them inside you. You put them on a pedestal. And now you are now conscious of your downsides and unconscious of some of your upsides. You have a false positive on their upsides and a false negative on their downsides. And then you have a false negative positive on your downsides and a false negative on your upsides. And so you skew it with a subjective bias, and you're not really seeing what's actually there. And whenever you do, you tend to inject their values into your life. It tends to cloud the clarity of your own mission in life, what you feel called and inspired, the difference you want to make in life, the inspiration, the path of self-actualization, as Maslow would describe. And the moment you do that, you give them power and you minimize you. And when you do, you're not being authentic to yourself because you're now beneath yourself. Anytime you're shamed and minimizing yourself relative to somebody else, you're exaggerating them and minimizing you, and that's not you. That's not your authentic self. I don't know, this time you resent somebody and you put them down in the pit, and you tend to act too proud to admit what I see in them inside me. I would never do that. I pride myself in never being that way. Now you exaggerate yourself and you're not being authentic. When you minimize yourself, that's inauthentic. When you exaggerate yourself, that's inauthentic. When you come back into balance, then you become authentic. So your intuition is trying to ask you and prompt in your awareness the downsides to the things you're infatuated with and the upsides to the thing you're resentful to bring things back into balance, to have homeostasis, to be able to have self-actualization, to see things as they actually are, not as you thought they were with your senses in reality, the realization of your senses, which are hallucinative and elusive at best, and see things as they really are. When you actually come to that realization and bring yourself back into balance, you have equanimity within yourself. You're not exaggerating and minimizing. You have equity between you and other people. That means you now have sustainable, fair exchange, which allows you to maximize your mental function, less noise, because there's nothing distracting you, no infatuation, resentment, making up the bondage in the mind and distractions, the evoked potentials. Now you have spontaneous action. And that takes you to your highest value, where you're spontaneously acting out of inspiration. And now you have, sustainable, fair exchange. You now have a more balanced business. You have more of a way of making income. People want to do business with you because you're not trying to get something for nothing or trying to give something for nothing. If you try to give something for nothing, you're going to try to not want to continue business with somebody. If you try to get something for nothing, they're not going to want to do business with you. But if you give a fair exchange that's sustainable, we both want to continue, which maximizes economics, maximizes your potential in business, and allows equity theory to maximize. These are all things that occur on your path of mastery. And in your social life, the same thing. You can either be a follower of a culture or you can lead a culture. If you lead a culture, it's because you're exemplifying authenticity. And every human being wants to be around people that are demonstrating this authenticity because it's inspiring, it's enthusiastic. It's literally great. Somebody is grateful, somebody is loving what they're doing, somebody is inspired and present and certain about what they're doing. That magnetizes and draws people to them. So whenever you're living authentically, you get to maximize your social life. You get to take out the noise of your brain. You get to have the greatest creativity, because when you're living by what's highest on your value, inspired, you end up taking on challenges instead of avoiding them. And when you pursue challenges that inspire you, you create innovation, creativity, and genius. So you wake up your genius, you have more stable business development, you have more income in relationships. When you're in an authentic state, you communicate in fair exchange with them. They want to be with you because that's what they want to be loved through, who they are, not who you want to make them by changing them or changing you relative to them. You automatically, your physiology and your autonomic nervous system, the prefrontal cortex activates the hypothalamus, the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain. The hypothalamus runs the autonomics to bring homeostasis to physiology, balances out the complementary opposite, sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is the circadian rhythm center, and the pineal gland, they keep melatonin and keep the circadian rhythms in balance. You literally get a homeostatic mechanism physiologically. And when you do, you're inspired. Because when you're doing something you really love and you're inspired by it and you're not judging things, you're not in strife, as emphatically said, you now have the path of self-mastery. On the Breakthrough Experience program that I teach, well, not every week, but almost every week, I developed this methodology. I call it the Demartini method, which is a series of questions to make you conscious of the unconscious. When you're infatuated, you need to be conscious of the downsides to calm yourself down and lift yourself up to them. When you're resentful to somebody, you need to lift them up and you need to bring yourself down to bring things back in equilibrium. So it's the exact questions to ask to make you conscious of what you're unconscious of, so you can bring yourself back into the self-actualized and equanimity state where you're now living in your executive function, where you're now taking command of your life. You're not trying to get something for nothing or give something for nothing. You're in fair exchange, which maximizes the empowerment of all 7 areas of your life. Any area of your life you don't empower, people are going to overpower you. And anybody you infatuate or resent is going to run your life. They're going to overpower you. But the second you love somebody, as emphatically said, you're not in the world of strife within yourself because you're not in a state of equanimity, and strife between you and others because you're not in a state of equity. When you're there, you're in your self-actualized state. You're in your enlightened state. You're in your objective truth state. Objectivity means neutral state. You're now resilient and adaptable. Your heart rate variability is maximized physiologically for resilience and adaptability. Your immune system is maximized. Your microbiome comes back into balance. They used to think that the immune system was something that was there to attack invaders. That's an antiquated idea. They now know that the immune system is basically part of the sensory system and is measuring the microorganisms in your body and letting the brain know so it can regulate through autonomic and epigenetics changes in physiology to maximize the homeostasis in the body. It's another extension of the homeostatic feedback system. In other words, when we're living by our highest values, we're living authentically, when we're actually in a state of equanimity and we're actually seeing things as they are, not as we judge them to be, as emphatically said, we see that there's nothing but love, all else was illusion. We activate the executive center. You now function from an executive position, and you get that in your life. You rise up in power because very few people are willing to walk the path of self-mastery. Most people who are not doing what they love, loving what they do, are inspired by their vision, enthusiastically working, are grateful for their position, are certain and present in their mastery because they've got an epistemological study in that area that they want to master and express, are basically sitting there caught in a life of mediocrity instead of a path of inspiration and genius. And I love helping people go on that path. I love waking people up to the realization they have. And believe it or not, as the Bonpa Lama taught me and shared, nothing's missing in you. At the level of the essence of your soul, the authentic self, nothing's missing you. At the level of the senses, things appear to be missing in you. The things that appear to be missing in you are the things you're too proud or too humble to admit you have that you see in other people. So if we compare ourselves to other people, instead of compare our daily actions to what's truly meaningful to us and what's really priority to us, we're not going to live the path of mastery. So the Demartini method is designed to ask questions, to see the hidden order in your apparent chaos, to see that nothing's missing, even though you think it is. And the thing that's missing is what's unconscious. And so you can literally take the synthesis and synchronicities of opposites that Jung was describing, and the Gestalt was describing in psychology, and Wilhelm Wundt was describing in the symmetry of opposites, the simultaneous contrast, as he called it. These are all terms for the very path of self-mastery. And the method, the Demartini method, is a science on how to integrate all that knowledge and be able to practically apply it to dissolve some of the subconsciously stored impulses and instincts that our animal nature keeps us trapped in, which makes us react before we think, and allows us to go into the executive center, out of the amygdala, into the executive center, where we think before we react. And if we do, we're now the leader, not the follower. We build our culture instead of follower culture. And we give ourselves permission to shine, not shrink. And that, I believe, is what the path of self-mastery has been stated throughout the centuries. Literally from the Eastern mystics, they called it the path of the sun in Egypt. And the mystics, the occults, writers described it as the path of the sun. That means that those individuals that were not of the multitude, that rose out and transcended and looked towards the sun and became enlightened and a reflection of the sun, they were the children of the sun. So in the Eastern mystics or the Western scientists, it doesn't matter. They're all pointing to a similar overlapping theme. And that's why I put together the Demartini method and the breakthrough experience to help people do that path, regardless of their source and starting points, whether it be religious or scientific, or whether it be in mathematical studies, integration, or whether it be purely neuroscience, or whether it be in the area of the field of philosophy. It doesn't matter where they start. I've integrated all the different writings and I put it together so you could have this path available to you. And I just wanted to take a few moments, this moment, this 30 minutes or so that I'm taking here, and share that that's available to you. That's something that I've worked on for nearly 50 years, because I wanted in my own life, I wanted to master my life. I wanted to be able to, do something extraordinary and have original ideas that served human beings on the planet. I wanted to have a global business. I want to have a financial independence. I want to have a global family dynamic. I want to have social influence. I want to be able to have physical vitality and energy. I want to be able to have an inspired path where I could honor and appreciate any religious or philosophical or perennial wisdom or teachings through the ages, but not be trapped by any of them, but incorporate them all, inclusive, not exclusive. That's the path that I wanted. And not everybody's interested in that whole path. They may be interested in building their business and mastering the business game, or mastering their economic game and wealth, or they want to master their field of intellectual pursuits, or maybe their spiritual quest, or maybe just their physical fitness, or maybe relationship dynamics or social leadership skills. It doesn't matter where you have in your hierarchy of values its priority. The path of mastery is the same. And I can show you how to integrate all of them so you can master all of them, because the reality is, when you're looking for a mate, you're looking for somebody that's got something to offer in all of them. When a woman's looking for a guy, she's looking for somebody that's fit, somebody that's intelligent, somebody that's ambitious, somebody that's got resources, somebody that wants to be with her and love her and appreciate her and have a family with her possibly. They're there to have social influence and get along with the people they care about, again, and be inspired by something. You're looking for somebody that's empowered in all areas. And they're looking for somebody empowered in all areas. So why not empower them all? Why not, on the path of mastery, empower all areas of your life? And it doesn't matter which one it is, the principles are the same. I love teaching those principles. And then we'll spill it over and show you how to super task that path of all of them. That's what the breakthrough experience is about. And that's exactly what my Demartini method's about. It's a science on how to awaken that for people who are receptive to that. It's not the lazy man's guide to enlightenment. It's the path of mastery. It's the path of empowerment or enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. So I just want to take some time to share that. And I do want to mention something that I hope you enjoyed this little free presentation. I spoke a bit fast, but you can listen to it slower on your thing if you want to. But in addition to this message I'm saying tonight, I want you to know that there's a free on-demand masterclass called Finding Meaning and Purpose on the Path of Self-Mastery. This is about the path of living by what I call the telos, an Aristotelian term for the end in mind, the very highest priority objective in life. and identifying what that is and being clear about what you're committed to in life. And this is a very powerful on-demand masterclass. You got something out of this little presentation now, you'll get something out of what I'll be saying on this masterclass. So take advantage of that. And thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you next week. But I think you can listen to this again if you need to listen to it more than once. But this is what I love doing. I love teaching, researching, and writing and sharing with people anything that can help them master life and do something, the evolvement of their consciousness into awareness about the magnificence of who they are. So if you're not appreciating yourself, join me at the Breakthrough Experience, learn the Demartini method, and let me share with you what I know will make a difference in your journey. So thank you until next week.